Imagine, realizing in the twilight of your life, or, well, maybe worse, right in the middle of a total civilizational collapse, that the societal rulebook you faithfully followed your entire existence was structurally designed to fail.
Yeah, that is a terrifying thought.
Right. Not just that you made a few personal mistakes along the way. I mean, we all do that. But that the entire framework you dedicated your energy to was fundamentally incapable of producing human flourishing.
It's a very specific flavor of existential terror.
Exactly. And that terror is exactly what we are unpacking today. So welcome to the deep dive. We are tearing into a really profound piece of historical audio today.
We are. It's lecture 1 of 4 from the Tauba Islam Digital Archive.
Yeah, delivered way back in December 1957. And our source material focuses on Surah Al-Hijr, specifically verses 1 through 18. Our mission here is to essentially dismantle what we are going to call the placeholder problem.
I really love that framing, by the way.
Mhm.
The placeholder problem is, well, it's a phenomenal way to look at it, because historically, masses of people have treated foundational, paradigm-shifting texts, and specifically the Quran in this context, as, placeholders for mystical chanting.
Like a magic spell book or something?
Precisely. Society takes this revolutionary manual for statecraft, sociology, human psychology, and what do? They wrap it in silk.
Right, they put it on a high shelf behind glass.
Yeah, and they treat it as a talisman. But the 1957 lecture we are examining today, it forcefully drags this text out of that mythological haze. It subjects it to the harsh, unforgiving light of reason.
Which is so refreshing.
It really is. The speaker in the archive is aggressively challenging the post-colonial, superstitious status quo of his era. He argues that treating the text as a magical object completely neuters its intended political and social power.
It totally strips its utility. And that brings us right to the springboard of this entire argument, because verse 2 contains this razor-sharp psychological observation about disbelievers eventually wishing they had submitted to the truth.
Yeah, that verse is usually heavily misunderstood.
Exactly. The common, I guess you could say, low-resolution reading of that verse, it treats it as posthumous intercession. The idea that someone dies, sees the fires of the afterlife, and cries out, "Ooh, I should have listened."
Right, a very literal afterlife-focused interpretation.
But looking at the source material, that interpretation completely misses the mechanical reality of what the text is actually diagnosing, doesn't it?
It completely misses it. The mechanical reality is far more immediate. I mean, the lecture argues this verse is diagnosing the psychological collapse of a society in real time.
Wow. So not after death.
No, while you are still very much alive. It is the dread of waking up one day and looking at the socioeconomic devastation all around you. You see extreme wealth inequality, systemic corruption, a population just exhausted by meaningless labor.
And you realize you built this.
Exactly. You realize the socio-political system you supported is inherently unsustainable. It's the horrific realization that you chose a path that structurally violated the natural laws of human development.
So to understand how a civilization avoids engineering its own collapse like that, we really have to establish what this text actually claims to be.
Right, which brings us to the linguistic breakdown.
Yeah, the source begins with a really rigorous linguistic breakdown of verse 1, specifically the term al-kitab. Now, the assumption for the average person is that al-kitab just means the book. A physical object made of paper and ink.
Which is a very limiting definition.
Hugely limiting, because if you restrict the definition to a physical object, you fundamentally alter how you interact with the information inside it.
You strip away its systemic authority. I mean, the lecture dives deep into the etymology of al-kitab within the context of statehood. It translates much more accurately to a prescribed code.
A system of laws.
Right. Laws, articles, binding clauses. We're talking about a constitutional framework here, not just a bound stack of paper.
Let's push that constitutional analogy further, because I think it's so helpful. If you take a nation's binding legal constitution, right, and you read it as if it were a collection of abstract, mood-setting poetry.
You'd have complete chaos.
Total societal anarchy. You don't just get confused, the whole system breaks down. You cannot govern a country with a poem.
No, you can't.
And you definitely can't regulate a financial system with a metaphor.
That's a great way to put it. And the source actually points out a crucial grammatical detail that locks this constitutional definition into place. It examines the Arabic conjunction wa, which directly follows al-kitab in the verse.
Okay, and how is wa usually translated?
In common parlance, it's almost universally translated as and. So surface-level reading gives you something like the book and the clear code.
As if they're two separate items sitting on a desk.
Exactly. But the lecture clarifies that in this specific classical context, why is used in an explanatory sense. It actually means meaning, or i.e.
Oh, wow. So it reads the book, i.e. the clear code.
Yes. The book is the code. The text is a permanent constitution.
That changes everything.
It really does. The lecture warns explicitly against reading the text like a disjointed montage, a moral platitude here, a fragmented historical story there.
Right. It's not a scrapbook.
No, it is a cohesive, systemic, legal, and social framework. Every single concept relies on the structural integrity of the whole.
So if we are dealing with a permanent constitutional code rather than, like, a mystical book of spells, that totally alters the mechanics of every traditional concept within it.
Absolutely, every single one.
Take the concept of Tauba, for example, which normally translates to repentance. In a purely ritualistic view, repentance is basically an emotional transaction.
Right, you feel bad about something.
Yeah, you feel guilty, you shed a tear, you ask the sky for forgiveness, and supposedly your slate is magically wiped clean.
But under a rigid constitutional framework, an emotional transaction is entirely meaningless.
You can't just cry to the law.
Exactly. I mean, you cannot apologize to the laws of physics after you've jumped off a building and expect gravity to suspend itself just because you're really sorry.
Gravity does not care about your feelings.
It doesn't. The system of cause and effect solely registers your actions within the system. So the source breaks down Tauba not as a fleeting feeling, but as a rigorous four-step physical and psychological operation.
The mechanics here are so fascinating. Let's walk through them. Step 1 is the cognitive awakening, right? Just realizing you are on the wrong path.
Yes, but cognition without friction achieves nothing.
Right. Thinking about stopping isn't stopping. Which brings us to step 2, where the actual work begins. You have to hit the brakes. You must physically stop the harmful action.
And the psychology of inertia in step 2 cannot be overstated here. A society, or even an individual, moving in a destructive direction builds a ton of momentum.
It's hard to stop a moving train.
Exactly. Stopping requires immense friction. It requires overriding your biological or societal conditioning. If you realize you are driving toward a cliff, but you keep your foot on the accelerator because the velocity feels comfortable,
Then step 1 was totally useless.
functionally useless. The cognitive realization does nothing if you don't brake.
So then comes step 3, which is physical and mental reorientation. You turn around.
You change direction.
And finally, step 4, which seems to be the linchpin of the entire process, walking the right path. The text calls this Amal, which translates to constructive, corrective action.
Yes, constructive action.
You literally have to expend tangible energy to offset the damage you did while traveling in the wrong direction.
And notice how the source introduces the inescapable constraint of thermodynamics and time into this equation.
Oh, right. The time constraint is brutal.
It is. If Tauba is defined as a physical journey of taking constructive action, doing Amal, then the concept of a deathbed realization is structurally absurd.
Because you're out of time.
Exactly. If the entire purpose of the Constitution is to mandate that you build a just society and you run out of time or physical energy to actually build anything, realizing your error at the moment of death yields zero functional result.
You can't lay bricks from a hospital bed.
You can't. The system demands action, not a belated change of heart when action is physically impossible.
That drastically changes how you should view accountability if you're listening to this. It's not a cosmic courtroom where you plead your case to a judge.
No, it's an architectural project.
Yeah.
You either laid the bricks or you didn't.
But this raises a really fundamental question. If this permanent code outlines the correct path of constructive action, how does it define the wrong path?
That's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah, because looking at the source, it doesn't use the typical theological framing of, sinners versus saints. It dives straight into social physics.
It redefines two of the most heavily burdened terms in the entire text. Kufr, which is conventionally translated as disbelief, and Iman, which is conventionally translated as belief.
Right, the classic binary.
Right. But the lecture strips away all that purely theological binary baggage. It defines them strictly in terms of human function and societal trajectory.
Okay, let's look at Kufr first. The source defines it not as a stubborn refusal to believe in an unseen deity, but as living purely at the animalistic level, like biological maintenance.
Right, it is an existence dedicated strictly to biological imperatives. Eating, drinking, procreating, acquiring territory, and then dying.
Just survival mode.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The text invokes the imagery of grazing cattle. Now, to be clear, cattle fulfilling their biological programming is not a failure.
Right, they're just doing what cows do.
They are operating perfectly within their systemic design. But a human being possesses higher cognitive faculties, the ability to project into the future, to synthesize information, to build complex, equitable structures.
Well, we have a different operating system.
We do. And for a human to restrict their existence to the baseline biological level is a fundamental betrayal of their potential. It is a failure to engage the constitutional code.
It's like, okay, think of it like someone purchasing the most advanced, complex supercomputer ever built, right? It's capable of simulating universes and curing diseases. And they exclusively use it to play a two-dimensional game of Pong.
That's a perfect analogy.
You are managing the hardware, you're keeping the machine plugged into the wall, but you are utterly ignoring the software's ultimate capacity.
And according to the lecture, ignoring that capacity creates a severe psychological pathology in human beings.
It's because that brain power has to go somewhere, right?
Exactly. The Source identifies this pathology as Takathur, which translates to endless accumulation.
Endless accumulation. How does that mechanism work?
Well, think back to the cattle. A cow eats grass until its stomach is full, and then its biological drive ceases. It rests.
It doesn't hoard grass for the next 10 years.
No, it doesn't. But a human being living at the animalistic level, meaning they have rejected any higher transcendent or societal purpose, they still possess that infinite human intellect and drive.
So what happens to that infinite drive when it's confined to finite biological goals, like just eating and having shelter?
It creates a vacuum.
Yeah.
The brain applies infinite capacity to finite resources.
Which just distorts everything.
Precisely. The drive becomes distorted into boundless, irrational greed. You build a shelter, fulfilling your biological need to avoid the elements. But because you have no higher purpose to direct your excess energy toward, you suddenly need a second house.
And then a third house.
Then a third. You build silos to store grain your great-grandchildren will never be able to consume. You endlessly compete in accumulation for the sheer sake of accumulation.
It's a game with no win state.
None at all. The lecture notes this specific trap where a person counts their wealth, feels a dopamine spike of momentary security, and then immediately looks over their shoulder to ensure they have out-accumulated their neighbor.
I mean, just look at our modern economic engine today. How much of it is entirely dependent on people buying a third television they don't actually need?
Or a luxury vehicle purely to outpace the person living next door.
Exactly. The source is diagnosing the psychological rot of hyperconsumerism decades before it reached its current peak. It's a race with absolutely no finish line.
And the source uses a really visceral metaphor for this, the concept of Amal, which means false hopes and illusions.
Oh, the donkey and the carrot.
Yes, it is a brilliant illustration of the thermodynamics of a society lacking a higher compass.
Yeah, you essentially tie a stick to a donkey's head with a carrot dangling just inches out of its reach. The donkey walks furiously, expending massive amounts of energy, chasing a desire it can never actually consume.
And to an outside observer, the donkey looks incredibly busy.
Super productive.
Highly active.
Yeah.
But it is fundamentally static in terms of true progression.
Wow. That is the definitive social physics of a civilization running on poofer. It is literally a society of donkeys chasing carrots.
That's exactly what it is. The entire civilizational engine runs on the exhaust of endless, unfulfillable desires. They build grander skyscrapers, consume more resources, and generate more capital, but they are entirely aimless.
And since resources are finite, but human greed under Takathur is infinite, this loop inevitably results in friction.
Massive friction. And that friction breeds extreme inequality, exploitation, and eventually total societal breakdown.
Okay, so how does the source define Iman to counter this entropy? If kufri is the animal level, what is the alternative?
Iman is defined as living at the truly human level. It means possessing a clear, transcendent destination.
So getting off the treadmill.
Getting off the treadmill. It requires subordinating the biological drives, the eating, the accumulation, the territorial instincts, to a higher, constructive societal objective mandated by the permanent code.
So you still eat and build houses, but it's not the ultimate goal.
Right. In a state of Iman, material wealth is no longer the carrot you are endlessly chasing. It becomes the fuel you consciously burn to travel toward a collective principal destination.
You aren't just surviving anymore. You are engaged in the architecture of a balanced society.
Exactly.
But I have to challenge this premise, though.
Go ahead.
If the permanent code is so empirically obvious, and if living at the human level of Iman is so logically superior to the destructive cycle of the donkey and the carrot,
Why doesn't everyone do it?
yeah, why do people fight it so fiercely? because the text spends a significant amount of time detailing how people aggressively mock the reminder, the zikr. If this system is the ultimate solution to societal collapse, why wouldn't the ruling class just co-opt it? Why wouldn't everyone just opt in?
Because adopting the permanent code fundamentally dismantles their monopoly on resources and power.
The catch.
Right. This is where the lecture shifts from social physics into a masterclass on the psychology of denial. The status quo, particularly for those who have mastered the game of endless accumulation, is highly profitable.
It works for them.
It works very well for them. A system of absolute truth and equitable distribution is not just an alternate opinion to them, it is a direct existential threat to their supremacy.
They can't co-opt a code that explicitly forbids hoarding wealth.
No, they can't. So their only recourse is systemic suppression and aggressive mockery.
And the source presents this brilliant hypothetical scenario in verses 14 and 15 to illustrate the depths of this denial.
Yes, the gate to heaven.
Right, the text essentially says, even if we opened a physical, literal gate to heaven right above these deniers, and they physically climbed through it, seeing ultimate reality and the consequences of the code with their own naked eyes,
They would still reject the data.
the psychological mechanism the text highlights here is just profound. It states that when confronted with undeniable, empirical, visual proof that their exploitative system is wrong, they wouldn't surrender.
No, they would literally say, our eyes have been hypnotized, or we are bewitched.
Wait, they literally say their eyes are hypnotized?
Yes, the cognitive dissonance is so extreme that they would rather believe reality itself is a magical trick than admit their socioeconomic foundation is flawed.
I guess that's the ultimate defense mechanism, because admitting the code is true means admitting that the carrot they've been chasing is an illusion.
And suddenly, they are strictly accountable for the destructive path they've walked. The brain protects the ego by deploying the ultimate heuristic, denial. I'm not wrong, my eyes are just under a spell.
This perfectly explains the lecture's argument against the utility of miracles, doesn't it?
It really does. The speaker points out how intellectually bankrupt it is to demand a miracle like, the historical demand for the splitting of the moon, to prove the validity of a socio-political system.
Demanding a miracle is basically a symptom of intellectual decay.
Exactly. The speaker argues that showing a stubborn, entrenched mind a miracle alters absolutely nothing structurally. If you split the moon in half, the monopolists won't suddenly distribute their wealth.
They'll just call you a magician.
Right. They will simply label the person who split the moon a very powerful sorcerer. Miracles bypass the intellect. They cannot build a stable, enduring foundation for societal conviction because they rely on awe rather than comprehension.
So true conviction doesn't come from a magic show.
No.
It is generated by what the source calls the engine of reason.
The engine of reason. The permanent code demands intellectual rigor. Engaging this engine requires mastering natural laws, understanding the brutal mechanics of cause and effect, and actively observing the historical consequences of societies that defied those laws.
So if you want proof that the code is valid, you don't ask for a magic trick.
No, the text tells you to look at the ruins of past civilizations that chased the carrot over the cliff. Their collapsed infrastructure is your empirical proof. True validation of the code comes from mastering the natural laws of the universe.
Which brings up a really critical issue of civilizational security. If a society is so prone to this kind of mass, willful delusion where people prefer a comfortable, profitable lie to a demanding truth, how does a civilization protect the integrity of the code?
That is addressed in verse 9, which establishes the ultimate security protocol for a functioning society. It's the absolute protection of the zikr, the reminder, the intellectual compass.
And how is it protected?
The lecture insists that the core axioms of this constitution are completely unchangeable.
Unchangeable. I can hear the modern listener pushing back on that, though. Isn't rigidity the enemy of progress? Like a modern society needs to adapt, right?
Sure, but there is a massive difference between adapting administrative laws and compromising core systemic axioms.
Okay, distinguish those for me.
Well, if the fundamental law states that wealth cannot be hoarded to the detriment of the marginalized, you cannot allow the wealthy to lobby and tweak that clause just because the economy modernized.
I see.
The unchangeable nature of the zikr is what prevents the ruling class from bending the rules of the game mid-play. Furthermore, the source makes it extremely clear that there are no religious intermediaries standing between the individual and the code.
No priesthood at all.
No priesthood, no clergy that claims exclusive secretive rights to interpret or alter the manual to suit the ruling elite. The code is transparent, permanent, and accessible to the intellect of the individual.
which perfectly sets up the final verses we are analyzing today, verses 16 through 18. And I have to say, this was the most illuminating epistemological shift in the entire lecture for me.
It's a huge shift.
These verses describe the cosmos. They talk about constellations beautifying the sky, but then they mention these stars being guarded against Shaitan's devils or demons by piercing meteors.
Right, the classic imagery.
Yeah, and if you read that with the placeholder mentality we talked about earlier, it sounds like a literal sci-fi space battle. Angels throwing flaming space rocks at red demons trying to eavesdrop on heaven.
And that literalized myth is exactly how the superstitious masses treated it for centuries. It became an ethereal fairy tale.
But the lecture deconstructs the superstition entirely, providing a radical rational synthesis. This imagery is not about literal celestial warfare, is it?
Not at all. It is a profound structural metaphor for the definitive end of a specific era in human history.
The end of the era of superstition.
Exactly. The speaker re-identifies who the shaitans represent in this sociological framework. They aren't literal monsters. They represent the fortune tellers, the astrologers, the witches, the false gurus who historically held massive political and social influence.
Consider the mechanics of how these individuals operated. They held societies hostage by claiming they had an exclusive backdoor channel to secrets from heaven.
They would look at the stars and tell a farmer, "The heavens are angry. You must pay me a portion of your crop to avert disaster."
Just a shakedown.
Total extortion. They inserted themselves as the indispensable middlemen of destiny.
They were gatekeeping reality. And the masses, lacking an intellectual compass, lacking access to the permanent code, lived in a state of constant, paralyzing fear of these unseen forces and the grifters who claimed to control them.
It was a highly effective mechanism of mass control.
So, within this metaphor, what is the meteor? What is the piercing, burning star that chases away the shaitan?
It is the piercing light of scientific, empirical, and rational inquiry.
Wow.
It is the human intellect aggressively chasing away the shadowy, manipulative guesses of witchcraft and astrology. The permanent code is essentially declaring the heavens are permanently closed to charlatans.
You can no longer use the mystery of the sky to subjugate the people on Earth.
Precisely. When a society mocks reason and abandons its intellectual compass, it inevitably loses its security. It falls prey to the fearmongers, to the fortune tellers, to those who sell false hope and demand blind obedience in return.
So these verses are essentially an emancipatory declaration.
They are. The era of looking up at the stars to divine your fate is over. The era of empirical knowledge has arrived.
The source explicitly instructs the listener to stop looking at the sky for their destiny and instead look at the earth. Look at cause and effect.
Look at the social physics of your own community. Your fate is not pre-written in the constellations. It is physically written in your actions.
Your Amal.
Yes, your constructive action and the structural integrity of the society you actively build. It is the ultimate call to human agency.
It entirely strips away the psychological comfort of fatalism. You can no longer shrug your shoulders and say, well, it was written in the stars.
No, you are forced to look at the code and ask, what constructive action is required of me right now in this specific socioeconomic reality?
This has been an incredible journey. We started with a text that the masses have often reduced to a mystical placeholder, a book kept behind glass for chanting.
And through the rigorous lens of this 1957 lecture, we discovered a robust, unforgiving framework for social physics.
We tracked the mechanics of moving from an animalistic life of endless accumulation, past the psychological traps of denial, to a permanent code built on reason, constructive action, and true human purpose.
The shift from superstition to systemic accountability is just massive. But, it leaves us with a highly provocative question regarding our own modern context.
Oh, lay it on us.
Well, if we consider our 21st century society to be so incredibly advanced, so hyper-rational, and scientifically literate,
Which we do.
then why is there still a multi-billion-dollar industry built around astrology apps, passive manifestation techniques, and algorithmic life hacks?
That is a brilliant point. I mean, look at how many people today try to manifest wealth by just thinking positive thoughts at the universe rather than engaging in the friction of building a better system.
Have we truly escaped the donkey and carrot cycle? Have we actually elevated ourselves from the animalistic level of kufr? Or have we simply digitized the fortune tellers?
Wow.
Have we just rebranded our superstitions for the algorithmic age, hoping a silicon shaitan will tell us our future so we don't have to take responsibility for our present?
Have we embraced the engine of reason, or are we still hoping to slip through a magical gate without doing the heavy lifting of building a just society? That is a profound diagnostic question for you to chew on as we wrap up. And the analysis of this archive doesn't stop here. In Lecture 24, we move from the psychology of the observer to the origins of the human struggle, exploring the specific verses, 19 to 42, regarding the clay and the fire, the evolutionary and psychological makeup of man. You won't want to miss it. But until then, stop looking for magic in the sky and start applying the code to the earth beneath your feet.